Hey everyone, Dr. Jamara Davis Welch here. Welcome back to those who have been following me for a while now, and if you are new to my channel, welcome. Today we are beginning a new series exploring another story from the Septuagint that most modern Bibles don't include. That is the story of Susanna. This will most likely be a three-part series where we will unpack different aspects of this narrative and extract lessons that are relevant for our times. Now I know some of you might be thinking, Jamara, who's Susanna? I've never heard of her. Don't worry, you are not alone in this. I myself hadn't heard of her until I read her story in the Septuagint. So let me first give you a brief overview. Susanna's story is found in the Apocrypha section of the Septuagint as an addition to the book of Daniel. This story takes place during the same Babylonian exile period that Daniel himself experienced, although Daniel doesn't appear until toward the end of Susanna's ordeal. Now, for those who may not be familiar with the term Apocrypha, let me provide a bit of context. The Apocrypha refers to a collection of ancient Israelite writings that were included in the Septuagint Bible, but not in the traditional Hebrew canon. These texts were considered valuable and historically significant. In fact, the original 1611 King James Version of the Bible included the Apocrypha, which was actually sandwiched between the Old and New Testaments. Just like the prayer of Azarias, as well as the prayer of Azarias and the Song of the Three Children that we explored in the previous series, Susanna's story provides us with powerful spiritual lessons that, in my opinion, are very relevant for today. Now, some of you may question whether the apocryphal text should be considered a scripture. I personally am of the opinion that we can certainly learn from their wisdom and the truths that they illustrate about God's character as well as our own faith journey. For me personally, given that the earliest believers, those who actually walked and talked with the Messiah himself, as they found value in them, I too am okay with them. I don't see a problem with also upholding these texts. Now that we got that out the way, let's meet Susanna. The Septuagint describes her as being a very beautiful woman from the tribe of Judah who feared the Lord. She was the daughter of Chelcias and was married to a wealthy man named Jehoiakim during the Babylonian exile. The scripture describes her parents as being righteous and that they taught their daughter according to the law of Moses. Now, the scripture says that Jehoiakim, who again was very wealthy, had a beautiful private garden adjoined to his house. I want you to put a pin in that part about the garden because we're going to come back to that shortly. It also notes that all of the Jews resorted to him because he was more honorable than all others. In addition to the Jews resorting to Jehoiakim, there were also some elders who spent a lot of time at his house. Specifically, during the same time, there were two elders from among the people who were appointed as judges. And these weren't just any men. They were described as being ancients of the people, which was referring to their advanced age. Now, I want you to look at what the Septuagint specifically states about them. It says, the same year were appointed two of the ancients of the people to be judges, such as the Lord spake of, that wickedness came from Babylon from ancient judges who seemed to govern the people. The text specifically says that same year they were appointed. So they were actually new to this position of authority. The passage also makes a connection to what I see as a pattern, and that is that wickedness came from Babylon from ancient judges who seemed to govern the people. This suggests that there was a historical pattern of older men being placed in positions of power, which makes sense as age is often associated with wisdom and power. But many of these judges were corrupt and only seemed to govern rather than truly upholding justice. The scripture continues, these kept much at Jehoiakim's house, and all that had any suits in law came unto them. I want you to think about the implications here. In my opinion, these corrupt judges frequented the home of a wealthy, honorable man to position themselves where they could gain access, influence, and advantage. Now, here's where the story takes a disturbing turn. As these judges spent time at Jehoiakim's house, they began to notice Susanna, who again was described as a very beautiful woman, walking daily in this garden. Susanna was just minding her own business, enjoying the privacy and serenity that the garden offered. This was her personal sanctuary. It was a place where she could retreat from the world and refresh herself. Now, the scripture tells us in verse 8 of the story, and the two elders saw her going in every day and walking, so that their lust was inflamed toward her. Here we get a clue that the specific type of corruption of these elders was their unbridled lust. This wasn't a momentary temptation. It was a persistent desire that they harbored and fed over time. Let me keep going and you're going to see what I mean. The Septuagint reveals it clearly in verses 9 through 12. And they perverted their own mind and turned away their eyes that they might not look unto heaven nor remember just judgments. And albeit they both were wounded with her love, yet durst not shew another his grief. For they were ashamed to declare their lust that they desired to have to do with her. Yet they watched diligently from day to see her. This is a profound description of the process of corruption. It starts with a perverted mind, a mindset that deviates from what is right and just. Then it progresses to intentionally turning away their eyes from heaven, which is a deliberate choice to ignore divine standards and accountability. Finally, it results in forgetting just judgments. In other words, losing sight of the very justice they were appointed to uphold. Again, this wasn't a momentary temptation. It was a persistent, festering desire that they harbored and fed over time. Their lustful desire was so intense that it was described as being a wound. Yet, they were ashamed to reveal it even to each other. Instead of dealing with this inappropriate desire properly by confessing it and repenting of it, meaning turning away from it, they nurtured it, making a daily practice of feeding upon and thinking about these corrupt desires. Let me keep going. The next part of their corruption involved conspiracy. Verse 14 says, "So when they were gone out, they parted the one from the other, and turning back again, they came to the same place. And after that, they had asked one another the cause. They acknowledged their lust. Then appointed they a time both together when they might find her alone." This is how corruption often works. It begins in the heart, it's nurtured in the mind, and then it conspires with others to achieve its ends. These elders acknowledged their shared lust and then plotted together to find Susanna alone. They moved from private corruption to collaborative evil. James chapter 1 verses 14 through 15 describes this process perfectly. It says, "But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death." These corrupt leaders allowed their desire to conceive a plan that would ultimately lead to attempted sexual assault, false accusations, and a conspiracy to execute an innocent woman. Now, as time went on, their opportunity came. The Septuagint says, "And it fell out as they watched a fit time. She went in as before with two maids only, and she was desirous to wash herself in the garden, for it was hot. And there was nobody there save the two elders that had hid themselves and watched her. Then she said to her maids, 'Bring me oil and washing balls, and shut the garden doors that I may wash.'" Now, here's where we see in the story what I see of as the ultimate exploitation of power. These elders waited until Susanna was vulnerable and alone in the garden after sending her maids away to get her bathing supplies. Then they approached her with an ultimatum that perfectly illustrates the corrupt abuse of power. "Behold, the garden doors are shut, that no man can see us, and we are in love with thee. Therefore consent unto us and lie with us. If thou wilt not, we will bear witness against thee that a young man was with thee, and therefore thou didst send away thy maids from thee." Their threat of false witness carried deadly weight. Under Mosaic law, the punishment for adultery was death by stoning. What makes this even more sinister is that Deuteronomy 19 verses 16 through 19 required that false witnesses receive the very punishment the accused would have faced. These elders were not only threatening Susanna with death, they were risking their own execution if discovered. That's how consumed they had become with their corrupt desires. They knew that as respected elders and judges, their testimony would carry authority. They could use their position to destroy an innocent woman if she didn't comply with their demands. This is the corruption that I see at its most vile, using power to force compliance through threats and coercion. Does this not ring alarmingly true today? We're living in times where we see corruption at the highest levels of our society, in government, in business, in religious institutions. Leaders who have been entrusted to protect the vulnerable instead exploiting them. Those who should be upholding justice, perverting it for personal gain. We see it when officials use their positions to enrich themselves or their associates. We see it when leaders silence those who speak truth by threatening their livelihoods. We see it when the powerful exploit the vulnerable for their own gratification. We see it when judges render verdicts based on personal bias rather than justice. Psalms 94 verses 20 through 21 declares, "Can a corrupt throne be allied with you, a throne that brings on misery by its decrees? The wicked band together against the righteous and condemn the innocent to death." This is exactly what happened to Susanna. The corrupt banded together against the righteous. But as we'll see in the upcoming parts of this series, God's justice eventually prevailed. So, what can we learn from this first part of Susanna's story? First, corruption in leadership, it's not new. It's as ancient pretty much as humanity itself. But the fact that it's common doesn't make it acceptable. God has always opposed corrupt leadership and has held leaders to a higher standard. Secondly, corruption usually begins with small compromises, turning one's eyes away from heaven, forgetting just judgments. It starts with a perverted mindset that prioritizes self-interest over justice and service. Leaders have to be vigilant against even small ethical compromises. Third, unbridled lust and unchecked desires are often at the root of corruption. Whether it's lust for power, money, pleasure, or influence, corrupt leaders allow their personal desires to override their public duties. As James wrote, these desires, when fully grown, give birth to death. Fourth, corrupt leaders often conspire together, reinforcing and enabling each other's corruption. They create systems that protect their abuses and silence those who would challenge them. This points to the crucial importance of proper accountability structures. Finally, corrupt leadership inevitably leads to the exploitation of the vulnerable. Corrupt leaders use their power to coerce and control others for their own benefit. As we close out this first part of our series on Susanna, I want to leave you with this thought from Proverbs chapter 16, verse 12. "It is an abomination to kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness." True leadership, godly leadership, is established through righteousness, not corruption. It protects the vulnerable rather than exploiting them. It upholds justice rather than perverting it. It serves others rather than serving itself. In our next video, we will continue Susanna's story and explore how the community responded to these corrupt leaders' false accusations. As a reminder, you can find my content on TikTok at SM Society JW, on Instagram at the SM Society, and on YouTube at the Supermodel Society. With that, salama and barakah, in other words, peace and blessings, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.